I thought her words were just a flash of anger. But when my daughter announced to the entire banquet hall that I shamed her, I realized this was an execution. She smiled as her mother-in-law took my seat, looking like she had just won a war. They had no idea I was prepared. In my purse sat a thick envelope I had carried for 8 months, waiting for them to prove me right and walk into the trap I set. My name is Lorraine Whitaker. I am 57 years old, a widow, and for 28 years, I worked in the internal audit department of North Lake Civic Solutions. My job was to find the mistakes people thought they had hidden in the margins of ledgers. I learned early on that numbers do not have feelings, and they never lie. People, however, lie constantly. They lie with their smiles, they lie with their silence, and sometimes, like tonight, they lie with a microphone in their hand under the crystal chandeliers of a banquet hall in Greyridge, Stonevale. It was the 10th anniversary of my daughter, Marissa, and her husband, Ethan. The room smelled of roasted chicken and heavy perfume. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, wearing the navy suit I had saved for 3 months to buy. I thought I was there to celebrate a decade of their marriage. I did not know I was actually there to attend my own public erasure. Marissa stood up near the head table. She looked beautiful in her silk dress, her hair swept up in a way that must have cost $300. She tapped the microphone, drawing the attention of the 70 guests in the room. I smiled, expecting a toast. "I want to thank everyone for coming," Marissa said, her voice trembling slightly. She turned her gaze toward me. It was not a look of affection. It was a look of disgust. But I have to be honest. Tonight is about family, and real family doesn't drag you down. The room went quiet. I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. "Mom," she said, looking directly at me, You just don't fit here. You shame me. Let my mother-in-law replace you." It was not a request. It was a cue. Darla Kincaid stood up immediately. She was the mother of the groom, a woman who wore her authority like a weapon. She had that aggressive, polished charm of a woman who ran the local PTA like a military junta. She stepped forward, her expensive heels clicking on the dance floor, and wrapped an arm around Marissa's waist. She looked at me and smiled. It was a sweet, poisonous smile that said she had won a game I did not even know we were playing. "Oh, honey," Darla cooed into the microphone, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "I am here. I have always been here." I watched Darla guide Marissa to sit down, but they did not sit just anywhere. Darla sat in my chair. I looked at the table. My name card was gone. In its place was a fresh card that read "Mother of the Bride" in elegant calligraphy, placed right in front of Darla. Then I looked down. The gift I had brought a check for $5,000 inside a silver box. Money I had pulled from my emergency medical fund was shoved under the table near the table leg. It looked like trash waiting for the janitor. I looked at Ethan. My son-in-law stared at his plate, refusing to meet my eyes. His silence was a signature on the contract of my humiliation. Around the room, I saw the phones go up. Marissa's friends were recording. Some were giggling behind their manicured hands. They were waiting for the scene. They wanted the crazy old woman to scream, to cry, to make a spectacle that would get 1,000 likes on social media. But I did not scream. I fell back into my training. I became the auditor. I scanned the room. I noted who was laughing. I noted who turned their heads away in embarrassment. I noted the smug satisfaction on Darla's face as she poured wine for my daughter. I catalogued every betrayal, filing it away in the steel cabinet of my memory. My hand drifted to my purse. Inside, my fingers brushed against the thick, sealed envelope I had carried with me for 8 months. On the front, in my own handwriting, were the words, "For tonight, if they push." They had not just pushed. They had shoved me off the cliff. I stood up. The room went silent again, anticipating the explosion. I smoothed the front of my jacket. I did not look at Marissa. I did not look at Darla. I simply turned my back on the head table and walked toward the exit. I kept my chin high and my pace steady. "Lorraine," someone whispered as I passed. But I did not stop. I pushed through the double doors and walked out into the cold night air of the parking lot. The noise of the party faded behind me. I walked past the rows of cars until I reached the far end of the lot, where a dark sedan was idling. The window rolled down. A man was sitting in the driver's seat. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. "Did they do it?" he asked. I opened the passenger door and sat down, clutching the envelope tightly in my lap. "Start the car," I said, my voice steady. They did exactly what we thought they would do. The silence in the rental car was heavy, but it was nothing compared to the silence that had grown between my daughter and me over the last 8 months. That was when the drift began. It started slowly, like a crack in a windshield you ignore until it shatters the whole glass. Marissa stopped coming over for Sunday dinners. She was always too busy with work, or too busy with Ethan's friends, or just too tired. But the phone still rang. It rang when they needed $5,000 for a house deposit. It rang when Marissa's car needed a new transmission. It rang when she was short on tuition for her master's program. I gave it to her every time. I am a widow who has not bought a new winter coat in 6 years. Since my husband died, I have lived a life that is small and grey. I clip coupons. I buy meat only when it has the bright orange sticker that says it expires the next day. I do not take vacations. I do not buy lattes. I saved every penny into what I called my peace fund, a safety net designed to keep me from ever being a burden on anyone when my body finally gave out. Marissa knew about the fund. She knew exactly how much was in it, because I was foolish enough to think honesty was part of love. Then Darla Kincaid arrived. Darla did not just enter Marissa's life, she colonized it. She became a life coach, a stylist, and a financial advisor wrapped in silk and venom. I watched as my daughter's vocabulary changed. She started using words like leverage and optics. She started looking at my living room furniture with a wrinkled nose, as if the smell of my hard work offended her new sensibilities. Darla was teaching her how to scrub the scent of poverty off her skin. And apparently, I was the source of the odor. I remember the first time I met Darla for lunch. She didn't ask about my hobbies or my late husband. She leaned across the table, her gold bracelets clinking against the porcelain, and smiled that shark-like smile. "So, Lorraine," she said, her voice smooth as butter. "I am just curious. Do you have any real assets, to leave to the children? Real estate is so tricky these days." She laughed afterward, as if it were a joke, but her eyes were calculating the square footage of my house. "Ethan used to be a good boy. He used to thank me for the casseroles I sent over, but under Darla's influence, he began to fade. He became a nodder. He stood in the background, agreeing with whatever Marissa or Darla said, a legal coward who prioritized a quiet life over a moral spine. The breaking point was not tonight. It was 3 months ago. I was lying in my hospital bed, recovering from a total knee replacement. The pain was throbbing in my leg, a dull, heavy ache that made it hard to think. Marissa came to visit, but she did not bring flowers. She brought a contract. She needed $10,000 for a landscaping project Darla had recommended to increase their curb appeal. I told her to take the checkbook from my purse, but she shook her head and handed me a pen and a document typed on crisp paper. "Mom," she said, avoiding my eyes. "Ethan and we think it is better if we do this formally. It is a loan. We will pay you back with 3% interest. It is for transparency." "Transparency?" I asked, my voice groggy from the medication. "I am your mother, Marissa. I do not charge you interest. Please." "Mom," she snapped. "Her patience thinning," Darla says. "She says money mixes badly with family, unless it is on paper. Just sign it. Don't be difficult." I signed it. My hand shook, not from the pain in my knee, but from the cold realization that my daughter was treating me like a bank with a bad credit rating. 2 weeks later, I was reviewing my bank statements. I saw a transaction that made no sense. Someone had transferred $1 out of my primary savings account and then transferred it back in 24 hours later. It was a test. Someone was checking to see if they had the right access codes and if I was paying attention. That was the moment the sadness turned into ice. This was not just about them being greedy. This was a systematic plan to take control of my finances and my reputation. They wanted to paint me as incompetent so they could step in as my guardians. I did not confront them. I did exactly what I had done at work for 28 years. I went quiet. I investigated. I made an appointment with a lawyer who specialized in elder law. And together, we drafted the documents that were now resting inside the envelope on my lap. I labeled it "For Tonight" because I knew, with the certainty of a mathematician, that eventually they would push too hard. Tonight, they pushed. And tomorrow, they would find out that gravity works both ways. Miles Hargrove was not a warm man, and that was exactly why I hired him. His office was located in a brick building on the edge of town, and it smelled of old paper and lemon furniture polish. Miles specialized in protecting the elderly from financial predation. He did not offer me tea. He offered me the truth. "Lorraine, you need to stop thinking of this as a family dispute," Miles said, tapping a pen against his desk. "This is a strategic isolation. In legal terms, we call this undue influence. They cut you off from your support system, they lower your self-esteem, and then they offer themselves as the only solution to the problems they created." He slid a black leather notebook across the desk toward me. "Document everything," he instructed. "Every phone call, every text message, every time they ask for money, every time they insult you. Feelings are not evidence. Lorraine, a logbook is evidence." I took the notebook. For the next month, I became a silent stenographer of my own abuse. I wrote down the date and time when Marissa called me at 2 a.m, sobbing that she needed $1,200 for a credit card bill she hid from Ethan. I wrote down the exact words Darla used when she visited my house, unannounced. "This place is too big for you to manage alone. You're getting forgetful." I almost believed them until I found the proof of their endgame. I was organizing some papers in the kitchen when I overheard Marissa on the phone in the next room. She thought I was gardening. "But Darla says if I get on the deed now, it avoids probate later," Marissa was saying, her voice whining. "She says it is just to help Mom manage the property tax." My blood ran cold. They were not just trying to spend my cash. They were coming for my home. The next morning, I went to the bank. I asked to speak to the branch manager, a man I had known for 15 years. He looked uncomfortable when I sat down. "Mrs. Whitaker, I am glad you came in," he said, shifting in his chair. "We actually rejected a request to change the primary beneficiary on your life insurance policy last week. The signature, well, it did not match your specimen card." "Show me," I said. He slid a photocopy across the desk. I stared at the signature at the bottom. It spelled my name, Lorraine Whitaker, but the loops on the L and the W were too decorative. They were perfect, artistic swirls. It was not a shaky forgery. It was a practiced piece of art. It looked exactly like the calligraphy Marissa had used on her wedding invitations 3 months ago. Someone had spent hours practicing my name to steal my death benefit. I walked back to Miles's office with a burning clarity. I did not want to just stop them. I wanted to catch them. "We need a bait account," Miles suggested, his eyes gleaming behind his glasses. "We open a small revocable trust. We put a modest amount in it, say $20,000. We make the account visible on your online banking dashboard, which we know they are monitoring. But we add a clause. The money can only be accessed with a physical token that is in your possession. Do it," I said. While Miles set the financial trap, I reached out to a woman named Nadine Rourke. Nadine was a former investigative journalist who had pivoted to crisis management. She met me at a diner on the highway, far from where Darla or Marissa might see us. She listened to my story, her face unreadable until the end. "They are building a narrative that you are senile and incompetent," Nadine said, taking a sip of black coffee. "Darla is winning the PR war because she is the only one fighting it. We are going to change that. But you have to let them get confident. Let them think they have won. Silence is your best weapon right now." So I went silent. When Marissa called to yell at me for not buying a new dress for the party, I just apologized. When Darla made snide comments about my failing memory at the grocery store, I looked down at my shoes. I let them believe I was breaking, and all the while, I prepared the envelope. Inside, I placed a notarized affidavit summarizing the attempted fraud at the bank. I included a printout of the IP addresses that had accessed my accounts, one of which traced back to Darla's home Wi-Fi network. And finally, I included the document Miles had drafted a single, irreversible command that would freeze them out forever if they dared to cross the line publicly. I sealed the envelope with a steady hand. I wrote for tonight if they push on the front. I prayed I would not have to use it. But looking at the forged signature on that bank form, I knew the time for prayer was over. It was time for an audit. I sat in the passenger seat of the rental car, the engine humming a low, steady note against the silence of the parking lot. The blue light of my cell phone screen was the only thing illuminating the dark cabin. The video was already online. One of Marissa's bridesmaids had posted a story to social media. It showed my back as I walked out of the banquet hall, overlaid with a filter that made the scene look like a joke. The caption read, "Bye, drama. Finally, some class in the room." I scrolled down. The comments were already rolling in from people who did not know me, judging my life based on a 15-second clip. "Toxic old lady," one user wrote. "She looks like a country bumpkin who lost her way," wrote another. "Mrs. Whitaker," the man beside me said. His voice was calm, devoid of the hysteria that was currently flooding my screen. I looked at him. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than my car. He extended a hand. "I am Graham Sutter. He said, "Miles asked me to be here tonight. I am an independent financial advisor. I spent 20 years as an internal auditor for large charitable foundations. My job was to find where the money was leaking. If you need someone to validate the facts in that room, I am your expert witness." I shook his hand. His grip was firm. He was not here to comfort me. He was here to verify the ledger. My phone buzzed again in my lap. A text message from Marissa popped up. "Leave. Don't embarrass me further." "You are pathetic." I stared at the words. Marissa never used the word pathetic. That was Darla's favorite adjective for me. My daughter was typing, but her mother-in-law was dictating. Then, a second notification appeared. It was from Ethan. "I'm sorry." I stared at the 3 words. For a second, I saw the boy I used to like, the one who used to help me carry groceries. But then, the message vanished. "This message has been deleted." He had panicked. His conscience had flared up for 3 seconds before his fear of his wife and mother extinguished it. But he was too slow. My thumb had already pressed the side buttons. I had the screenshot. I had proof that he knew this was wrong and chose to do nothing. That made him an accomplice. "Are we leaving?" Graham asked, his hand hovering over the gear shift. I looked at the banquet hall. The lights were blazing. They were inside, celebrating my erasure. They thought I was crying in the car, broken and defeated. "No," I said, opening the car door. "I am not leaving. I am going back in to close the books." I stepped out into the cold night air. Graham followed me, carrying a slim briefcase. I did not walk like a mother who had just been disowned. I walked like a senior auditor entering a department that had failed its compliance check. I pushed open the double doors of the banquet hall. The air inside was warm and smelled of expensive perfume and roast beef. The DJ had stopped the music. All eyes were on the dance floor. Darla was holding court. She stood in the center of the room, holding a velvet box. She pulled out a thick gold bracelet encrusted with small diamonds. "This bracelet has been in the Kincaid family for 4 generations, Darla announced, her voice booming through the speakers. She clasped it around Marissa's wrist. "It is a symbol of continuity. It belongs to a daughter who truly understands the value of legacy. A real daughter." Marissa wiped a tear from her eye, looking at Darla with practiced adoration. The guests cooed. It was a perfect scene. It was a ritual of replacement, performed live. I walked straight to the edge of the stage. The click of my heels on the hardwood floor was rhythmic and loud. People turned. The smiles dropped from their faces. Marissa froze, her hand halfway to her mouth. Darla's eyes narrowed into slits. I did not scream. I did not throw a drink. I simply walked up the 3 steps to the platform where the microphone stand was waiting. Darla tried to step in front of me, but I moved with a purpose that made her hesitate. I took the microphone. The feedback whined for a split second, cutting through the tension. "Excuse me," I said, my voice flat and calm. "Just 1 minute. I need to say a toast." The room went deadly silent. Ethan looked like he was about to vomit. Darla looked ready to call security, but nobody moved. They were paralyzed by the sheer audacity of my return. And nobody noticed the woman standing in the back corner, near the kitchen service entrance. Nadine Rourke. She was not holding a phone. She was holding a professional-grade camera with a shotgun microphone, the red recording light steady and unblinking. She was capturing every pixel of the truth, and this time, there would be no edits. To 10 years. I said into the microphone. My voice was steady, projecting clearly to the back of the room where the servers were pausing with their trays. And to family. I turned slightly to look at the head table. Darla was beaming. She thought this was the surrender. She thought I was about to apologize for being an embarrassment and shuffle off into the night. Marissa had her arms crossed over her chest, her chin tilted up, waiting for me to grovel. She wanted her mother on her knees so she could feel tall. I want to thank you. Darla, I continued, locking eyes with her. Thank you for helping me see clearly. You have always said that finances should be transparent, that families should not have secrets. Darla nodded, swirling the wine in her glass. That is right. Lorraine, she said loud enough for the front tables to hear. Honesty is best. I agree, I said. So let us be honest. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small stack of papers. They were printouts of bank transfers, enlarged so the text was visible even from a distance. On February 12th of this year, I read from the first sheet, my tone shifting from conversational to clinical. Marissa, you came to my house crying about a credit card debt. I transferred $4,500 to your account. Here is the receipt. Marissa's jaw dropped. She uncrossed her arms, her hands fumbling at her sides. On May 30th, I continued, dropping the first page to the floor and holding up the next. You told me Ethan's truck needed a new transmission. I wired you $3,200. Here is the confirmation. Mom, stop. Marissa hissed, her face flushing a deep, blotchy red. And on August 19th, I said, ignoring her, my voice rising just enough to cut through the murmurs spreading through the room. You needed a deposit for this very venue. You told me it was a loan. You asked for $5,000. I sent it. Here is the timestamp. I looked at Ethan. He was staring at his wife with a look of absolute horror. $12,700 in 8 months. I said to him, Ethan, did you know your transmission cost $3,000? Or did you fix it yourself like you always do? I never asked for that. Ethan stammered, looking from me to Marissa. Marissa said her bonus covered the party. The laughter at the guest tables had died completely. The people who had been recording me were now lowering their phones, sensing that the entertainment had turned into an indictment. I did not stop. I reached for the document Graham had handed me earlier. But money is just money, I said. This, however, is a crime. I held up the photocopy of the beneficiary change form. This was submitted to my bank 3 weeks ago. I announced, it is a request to change the sole beneficiary of my life insurance policy to Marissa Kincaid. It was rejected. Do you know why? Because the signature is a forgery. It is a beautiful forgery, but it is not mine. Who submitted this? Darla stood up so fast, her chair screeched against the floor. The mask of the benevolent matriarch cracked, revealing the panicked predator underneath. This is enough, Darla shouted, waving her hand dismissively. You are paranoid. Lorraine, you are imagining things. Everyone knows you have been confused lately. You need to go home and rest. You are having an episode. It was the classic move. The gaslight. Paint the witness as insane so the evidence doesn't matter. She is not confused. A deep voice boomed from the side of the room. Miles Hargrove stepped out from the shadows near the DJ booth. He was holding a leather folder. I am Miles Hargrove, attorney at law, he stated, his voice carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. I represent Mrs. Whitaker. On October 15th, my client underwent a full cognitive and neurological evaluation by a court-certified specialist. She scored 100% on her capacity test. She is legally, medically, and factually sound of mind. You cannot dismiss her as senile. Mrs. Kincaid? You have to answer her as a defendant. Darla froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. And since we are talking about clarity, I said, there is one more thing. I nodded to Nadine in the back. She pressed a button on her tablet, which was connected to the room's audio system via Bluetooth. The speakers crackled for a second, and then a voice filled the room. It was not my voice. It was Darla's. The quality was crystal clear, recorded in a quiet room. She is getting old. Marissa. Just get the power of attorney. If we get the house now, we don't have to deal with probate later. Just push her out. Make her feel like she can't handle it. She will fold. She always folds. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Marissa looked at Darla, her eyes wide with a genuine, terrified shock. It was the first time she realized that the script she had been following was not written for her benefit. The recording had stripped them naked in front of 70 witnesses. I lowered the microphone just an inch. I did not fold. Darla. The silence that followed the recording did not last. It shattered the moment Darla regained her composure. She did not apologize. She did not look ashamed. Instead, she threw her head back and let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like glass breaking. This is pathetic. Darla spat, pointing a manicured finger at me. You are sick. Lorraine. You are jealous. You are obsessed with your daughter. And you cannot stand that she has finally found a mother who actually knows how to guide her. Who are these men? Who are these strangers you brought here to ruin my family's reputation? You are being manipulated by people who want your money. I remained perfectly still. The hysteria in her voice was the best evidence I could have asked for. I am not being manipulated. Darla, I said calmly, I am being audited, and I brought the auditor. I gestured to Graham Sutter, who stepped forward from the shadows. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. My name is Graham Sutter, he announced, his voice projecting without a microphone. I am an independent financial forensic advisor. Mrs. Whitaker does not pay me a salary. I am here on a pro bono basis to verify the integrity of these financial claims. All my findings are documented and notarized. Graham looked directly at Marissa, who was trembling. We tracked the unauthorized access attempts to Mrs. Whitaker's savings account. Graham said, we identified a pattern of login attempts that failed due to incorrect security questions. These attempts originated from a specific IP address. That address is registered to a residential Wi-Fi network named Kincaid Home. Marissa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That is not true. I never... What? What is an IP? Darla interrupted, her eyes darting around the room in confusion. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Darla had just exposed herself. By asking the question, she revealed that while she might not have understood the technology, she was the architect behind the intent. She was the one pushing Marissa to find the passwords, even if she did not understand how the digital trail worked. Ethan suddenly stepped forward. He looked pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He reached for Marissa's arm. Marissa? Ethan said, his voice weak. We should go outside. We need to talk about this. Darla's hand shot out and clamped onto Marissa's forearm like a vice. She did not look at her son. She just held Marissa in place, treating her daughter-in-law like a human shield. "She is not going anywhere with you," Darla hissed at him. Ethan looked at his mother, then at his wife. For a second, I thought he would finally be a man. I thought he would pull his wife away from the woman destroying us. But he didn't. He looked down at his shoes and stepped back. He was a coward, legally and morally. I looked at my daughter. She was trapped between a husband who would not fight for her and a mother-in-law who was using her as a weapon. "You said I shamed you," I said, my voice low, but carrying across the silent room. "You said I embarrassed you, but that is not it. Is it? You were not shaming me. Marissa, you were selling me." A collective gasp went through the room. The brutality of the truth hung in the air. Suddenly, a chair scraped against the floor near table 4. A woman stood up. It was Sarah, a former colleague from Northlake Civic Solutions who had retired 3 years ago. I had not even realized she was invited. "Lorraine is telling the truth," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly but determined. 2 months ago, that woman. She pointed a trembling finger at Darla. She called the HR department. She tried to impersonate Lorraine. She wanted to know the lump sum value of Lorraine's pension plan. I recognized the voice immediately. Darla's face turned a violent shade of crimson. I was protecting Marissa. She screamed, abandoning her poise entirely. I was making sure the family had security. I was trying to make sure everything was in order. Protecting her, I countered, stepping closer to the edge of the stage. You were protecting her with a forged signature. You were protecting her by teaching her how to steal from her own mother. Darla opened her mouth to scream again, but I raised my hand. The gesture was so authoritative that she actually stopped. "I am done," I said. "I am leaving this party. You wanted my seat. Darla, you can have it. But before I go, I have one last thing to do." I reached into the large tote bag I had brought with me. "For 8 months. Marissa, you have been asking me for this," I said, looking at my daughter. "You told me I needed to loosen up. You told me I needed to give you what you deserve. You told me to stop holding on to things." I pulled out a thick, legal-sized envelope. It was heavy. "So," I said, tossing the envelope onto the table right in front of Marissa. It landed with a heavy thud, knocking over a wine glass. Red wine spilled across the white tablecloth like blood. "Here is exactly what you asked for." Marissa stared at the document she had pulled from the envelope. Her hands were shaking so violently that the paper rattled like dry leaves in a storm. It was not a check. It was not a deed. It was a notarized trust amendment, stamped with the official seal of the state of Stonevale just 3 hours ago. "What? What is this?" Marissa asked, her voice cracking. "Read the beneficiary line," I said, my voice calm but heavy with the weight of the decision. Marissa's eyes darted across the page. Her face went pale, draining of all the colour the expensive makeup had tried to add. "The Stonevale Fund for Elderly Women Victims of Financial Abuse," she read aloud, looking up at me in horror. "Mom?" "What did you do? I did what I had to do," I replied. "As of 5 o'clock this evening, my entire estate, including the house, my savings, and my life insurance, has been placed into a revocable trust. The primary beneficiary is no longer you, Marissa. It is that fund. You can't do that," Marissa screamed, slamming the paper down onto the wet tablecloth. "That is my money. That is my future. You are destroying my life." The mask had finally fallen completely. There was no concern for my health. There was no worry about my loneliness. There was only the raw, ugly panic of a child realizing the bank vault had slammed shut. "And there is one more clause," I said, pointing to the bottom of the page. "Read paragraph 4. It is the trigger clause. If there is any attempt to challenge my competency, or any further attempt to access my accounts without authorization within the next 72 hours, the trust becomes irrevocable. That means the money is locked away from this family forever. Legally untouchable." Marissa looked like she had been slapped. She turned to Darla, her eyes pleading for a solution. But Darla was staring at the document with cold calculation, realizing her legal maneuvers had just been checkmated. "Mom, please." Marissa sobbed, the tears flowing freely now. "You are punishing me? Just because I wanted to fit in? Because I wanted a nice wedding? I am not punishing you," I said, feeling a sharp pain in my chest. "I am protecting myself. There is a difference. I will still help you. Marissa, if you need food, I will buy you groceries. If you are sick, I will pay the doctor directly. But I will never again hand you cash to burn on a lifestyle you cannot afford. If you want my help, you will treat me with respect and transparency." Ethan stepped forward then. He looked terrified, glancing around at the guests who were watching this family drama unfold with morbid fascination. "Lorraine, please," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. Don't do this here. Let's just go outside. We can fix this. You are making a scene. People are staring." I looked at my son-in-law, even now, with the truth bleeding out on the table. His biggest fear was not the morality of what they had done, but the optics of it. "Let them stare," I said. "Maybe they will learn something." I turned back to Marissa. "From this moment on," I stated clearly, "you do not call me for money. You call Miles Hargrove. You do not text me at midnight asking for a loan. You submit a request to my trustee. And do not bother coming to the house to beg. I changed the locks an hour before I came here. Your key will not turn. I also reset all my digital passwords and froze the old power of attorney documents you had me sign. It is over." Marissa slumped into her chair, burying her face in her hands. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the ventilation system. I looked at the top of her head, the expensive hairstyle I had probably paid for in some roundabout way. The anger inside me began to cool, leaving behind a deep, hollow sadness. "You know," I said softly, my voice catching for the first time. Inside that envelope, there was another document. A draft I had Miles prepare 2 months ago. It was a deed transfer. I was going to give you the house, Marissa. I was going to give it to you as a 10th anniversary gift because I wanted you to feel secure. Marissa looked up, her eyes wide and red-rimmed. "But then you stood up on that stage," I continued, pointing to the microphone stand where she had delivered her speech. "And you said I shamed you. You said, 'Let my mother-in-law replace you.' That was the moment you lost the house. Not because you were greedy, but because you fired me. You cannot inherit from a mother you have already replaced." I turned to leave. I felt lighter, as if a heavy coat had been lifted from my shoulders. I had taken back my name, my money, and my dignity. As I passed Darla, she leaned in. She was not looking at the papers anymore. She was looking at me with eyes that were black and hard as coal. "You think you are smart," Lorraine, Darla whispered, low enough that only I could hear. But you have no idea who you just messed with. This isn't a game of checkers. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just kept walking toward the exit, knowing that while I had won the battle, the war was far from over. I woke up the next morning to the sound of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. It was a relentless, angry buzz that had been going on since dawn. I picked it up and saw a notification from a local community page. Someone had posted a video of me from the night before, but it was not the whole truth. It was a jagged, 20-second clip edited to make me look like a monster. It started right where I began reading the list of bank transfers. There was no context, no mention of the forgery, and certainly no audio of Darla's confession. On the screen, I just looked like a bitter, petty old woman humiliating her daughter over a few bills. The caption read, "Mother of the bride ruins wedding over money. Toxic parenting at its finest." My stomach churned. I sat on the edge of my bed, feeling the walls of my quiet house close in. Then, Nadine Rourke went to work. By 10 o'clock. The narrative shifted. Nadine uploaded the full, unedited 5-minute video to the same forum. She included the timestamps and a transcript. The moment Marissa said, "Let my mother-in-law replace you," played out in high definition. It cut through the internet noise like a knife. The comments section turned into a battlefield. Half of Greyridge called me a dictator who used money to control her children. But then, the messages started coming into my private inbox. They were from women my age, widows and grandmothers who had been silently erased by their own families. My son did this to me last year. One message read, "Stand your ground. Lorraine." I did not have time to feel vindicated. At noon, Miles Hargrove called. "Lorraine, listen to me carefully," Miles said, his voice tight. "Darla has escalated. An anonymous complaint was just filed with the probate court claiming you are suffering from rapid cognitive decline. They are requesting an emergency guardianship hearing. They want to freeze your assets for your own protection, pending an investigation." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. It was the nuclear option. If they could prove I was incompetent, they would become the legal custodians of the very money I had locked away. "They are trying to say I am crazy," I asked, my voice trembling with rage. "They are trying to say you are vulnerable," Miles corrected. But we were ready for this. "I have already filed a motion to dismiss. I attached the results of your cognitive exam from last month. I also attached the affidavit from Graham Sutter regarding the IP address. We are framing this as a retaliatory abuse of process. They want a guardianship. I am going to give them a countersuit for elder abuse." I hung up, thinking the worst was over for the day. I was wrong. 2 hours later, a process server knocked on my door. He handed me a thick envelope. It was not from the court. It was a civil lawsuit filed by Marissa and Ethan. They were suing me for unjust enrichment and claiming an equity interest in my house. The lawsuit argued that they had contributed significant funds and labor to the maintenance of the property over the last 2 years, and therefore, they owned a 20% stake in my home. They listed a new roof, a kitchen island renovation, and a bathroom upgrade as their contributions. I walked into my office and pulled out the file marked House Maintenance. I flipped through the receipts. I found the invoice for the roof repair. It was paid for by a credit card ending in 4589. That was my card. I found the receipt for the kitchen granite. Same card. I remembered those days. Marissa had offered to handle the contractors because I was working late. She said, "Mum, just give me your card. I will sort it out so you don't have to stress." I dialed Miles again. "They are claiming they paid for the roof," I told him, staring at the paper. "But I have the credit card statements. Marissa used my card to pay the contractors. She is trying to claim equity in my house using my own money." "That is fraud," Miles said, and I could hear him typing furiously in the background. "Send me the scans. Now." While I was scanning the receipts, Nadine called. "Lorraine, you are not the first one," Nadine said without preamble. I did some digging into Darla Kincaid's past in her old town. I found 2 other families. In both cases, there was a widowed parent, a quick marriage involving a Kincaid child, and a sudden transfer of property deeds shortly before the parent was moved into an assisted living facility. She has a playbook, Lorraine, and she has run it twice before. I looked out the window at the grey sky of Stonevale. The trees were bare, stripping down for winter. I felt a cold realization settle in my bones. This was not just a family squabble. I was fighting a predator who had eaten before. The final blow came at 5 o'clock. A courier delivered a formal summons. The court had ordered mandatory mediation before any hearings could proceed. I held the paper in my hand. The date was set for next Tuesday. I looked at the names listed: Lorraine Whittaker versus Marissa Kincaid, Ethan Kincaid, and Darla Kincaid. I walked into the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. I did not turn on the lights. I sat in the dark, listening to the silence of the house I had worked 30 years to pay off. They wanted to sit across a table from me. They wanted to talk. "Fine," I whispered to the empty room. "Let's talk." 3 days before the mediation, the war moved from the courtroom to my driveway. I woke up to find the motion sensor floodlight above my garage shattered. It was not just broken. The wires had been cut with precision. The security camera I had installed the day after the party was blinded, its lens smashed in. This was not the work of angry teenagers or the local PTA gossip circle. This was professional. Graham stood in my driveway, looking at the hanging wires. "This is intimidation." "Lorraine," he said, his voice low and serious, "Darla is terrified. If she cannot bully you into submission, she will try to erase your legal standing. If that guardianship petition goes through, it is legal robbery. You lose the right to sign checks. You lose the right to hire a lawyer. You effectively become a child in the eyes of the state." I felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the morning wind. They were not just coming for my money anymore. They were coming for my freedom. That afternoon, I agreed to meet Marissa at a small coffee shop 2 towns over, far away from Grey Ridge gossip. I needed to look her in the eye one last time. She looked terrible. Her eyes were puffy, and she wore a stained sweatshirt, a stark contrast to the silk dress she had worn to humiliate me. "Mom," she whispered, staring at her latte. I didn't know she would go this far. Darla said she just wanted to help manage the estate. She said you were getting overwhelmed." "I am not overwhelmed." "Marissa," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I am being hunted. And you are holding the ammunition. Did you sign that beneficiary form? Did you practice my signature?" Marissa flinched. She opened her mouth to speak, but her eyes darted to the door. Ethan walked in. He looked like a man who had not slept in a week. He slid into the booth beside Marissa, not daring to look at me. "It was me," Ethan said, his voice barely a murmur. "I mean, I gave her the deed. About 6 months ago. Darla said she wanted to check the zoning laws for a potential expansion, for when we moved in to take care of you. I made a copy and gave it to her. I thought I was helping. I looked at them. My daughter, the follower. My son-in-law, the coward. You handed a shark the keys to the tank, I said, and now she is trying to eat me alive. Listen to me very carefully. On Tuesday, at the mediation, I am going to present evidence of attempted fraud. That is a felony. It carries prison time. Marissa gasped, grabbing Ethan's hand. However, I continued. If you stand up in that room and tell the truth that Darla orchestrated the forgery and the lawsuit, I will ask the district attorney to show leniency toward you. It is your choice. Tell the truth, or go down with her. Marissa's lip quivered. Mum, I can't go to jail. We are trying to have a baby. Just then, her phone rang. It was lying face up on the table. The screen flashed, Mom Darla. Marissa stared at it like it was a bomb. She picked it up with a trembling hand. Hello, she whispered. I could hear Darla's voice on the other end, loud and piercing. Don't you dare let her get into your head, Marissa. Think about your future. Do you want to be a bad mother? Do you want your children to grow up poor because your mother is selfish? Stay strong. I am handling this. Marissa's face hardened. The fear of poverty, implanted by Darla for months, was stronger than her love for me. She hung up and looked at me, her eyes cold again. I can't do it. Mum, she said. Standing up, Darla says. Darla says you are just trying to scare us. She pulled Ethan up, and they walked out, leaving me alone with my cold coffee. I called Nadine immediately. She chose the lie. I told her. Then we stopped playing defense. Nadine said. We turned the mediation into a show, but first, we need to get Darla into the room with her guard down. We need to feed her ego. We hatched a plan. It was risky, but it was the only way to end this permanently. I sent a formal invitation to Darla's lawyer. It was an invitation to a charity announcement to be held at the community centre directly before our mediation session. The invitation implied that I was capitulating, that I was going to publicly hand over the management of the new trust to the family as a peace offering. I knew Darla. She could not resist a public victory. She would come to gloat. She would come to be crowned. That night, I stood in front of the mirror in my hallway. I looked at the lines on my face, the grey in my hair. They had tried to use these things against me, to paint me as frail and expiring. I touched the cold glass. I was not frail. I was a trap. You want to replace me? I whispered to the reflection. Fine. Come and take the seat. I turned off the light. The house was dark, but for the first time in weeks, I was not afraid of the shadows. I was waiting for them. The Grey Ridge Community Hall was packed. Nadine had done her job well. The local press was there, and I saw at least 3 cameras live streaming to community social media pages. Darla walked in wearing a white suit that cost more than my car. She waved to the crowd, her smile bright and benevolent. She thought this was my surrender. She thought I was about to announce that I was stepping down and handing the reins of my estate over to the capable hands of my family. I stood at the podium. My hands were steady. Thank you all for coming. I said into the microphone. Today, I am announcing the creation of the Robert Whittaker Legal Defense Fund. It is named after my late husband. Its purpose is to provide immediate legal counsel to elderly individuals who are being targeted by financial manipulation, specifically by their own relatives. The crowd applauded politely. Darla stood up, beaming. She turned to the audience and placed a hand on her chest. "I am just so proud to be part of this," Darla announced, her voice projecting to the back of the room. "Lorraine and I, we agree that protection is paramount." "We do," I said, cutting her off. "Which is why I have invited my attorney, Miles Hargrove, to the stage." Darla's smile faltered slightly as Miles walked up. He did not smile. He opened a folder. "We are currently filing a formal complaint regarding attempted fraud and conspiracy to commit elder abuse," Miles stated, his voice dry and clinical. "We have documented evidence of a fraudulent guardianship petition filed anonymously 2 days ago. We also have proof of who filed it." Darla laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "This is ridiculous. Lorraine, you are having another episode. Play the tape. Nadine," I said. The speakers crackled. Darla's voice filled the hall, loud and undeniable. "Just tell the doctor she is forgetting names. Marissa. If we paint her as incompetent now, the court will grant emergency custody. Dr. Evans owes me a favor. He will sign the paper." The room went dead silent. Marissa stood up, her face pale. That is out of context," Marissa stammered. "I never." Nadine didn't stop. The screen behind me lit up. It was the unedited video from the anniversary party, showing the full cruelty of their ambush. Beside it, Nadine projected a screenshot of a text message chain. The sender was Darla. The message read, "Use these exact words. You shame me. Make it hurt, or she won't break." The audience gasped. The murmurs turned into angry whispers. Darla looked around, realizing the walls were closing in. She turned to Ethan. "Tell them," Darla commanded, grabbing his arm. "Tell them your mother-in-law is unstable." Ethan looked at me. Then he looked at Darla. He pulled his arm away from her grip. "I can't do it," Ethan said, his voice shaking. He pulled out his phone. I have the email. Ethan." "Shut up," Darla shrieked. "She sent me an email last week," Ethan said, addressing the room, holding his phone up like a shield. The subject line is asset seizure strategy. It says, "If she resists, we will lock her down with guardianship. I have done it before, and I will do it again." Darla stumbled back. She looked for an exit, but the doors at the back of the hall opened. 2 uniformed officers and a woman in a grey suit. The investigator from Adult Protective Services stepped inside. They did not draw weapons. They simply stood there, waiting. It was the end of the show. Marissa looked at the police, then at Darla. The realization hit her. There was no inheritance. There was no victory. There was only the law. "I didn't read them," Marissa screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Darla. "I didn't read the papers. She told me to sign. She said Mom would be fine. She said it was just for taxes." "You traitor," Darla hissed, lunging at Marissa. But the officers moved in. "Darla Kincaid," the investigator said calmly. "We would like to ask you some questions regarding the petitions you filed in 3 different counties." The image of the perfect matriarch crumbled. Darla was escorted out, her head high, but her hands shaking uncontrollably. She looked at me one last time, hatred burning in her eyes. But I did not look away. Marissa stood alone in the center of the aisle. The crowd parted around her. She looked small. She looked like the child I had raised, but twisted by greed and the desperate need for approval from the wrong mother. I stepped down from the stage. I walked right up to her. I did not hug her. I did not yell. "You can be ashamed of me," I said softly, "but I will never be ashamed of saving myself." I walked past her, out the double doors, and into the cold evening air of Grey Ridge. The sky was a deep, bruised purple. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that finally felt like my own. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from Marissa. "I want to learn how to be a daughter again." I stared at the screen. I did not reply. Not yet. Forgiveness is expensive, and she had not yet earned the credit. I looked up at the first star appearing in the twilight. I realized then that revenge is not about destroying the people who hurt you. It is about reclaiming the life they tried to take, and living it so fully that their absence becomes irrelevant. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below, sharing your location and your thoughts on Lorraine's decision. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Nora Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.